This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, January 27th, 1888, the National Geographic Society is incorporated in Washington, D.C. for the, quote, increase and diffusion of geographical knowledge. The following Monday, dads around the country got their first copy of National Geographic magazine in the mail. They sat down in their armchair and thumbed through it while muttering under their breath, I never knew that about glaciers. Now, that wasn't exactly how quickly it happened, though, you know what? The magazine was out there like 9 months or so after the founding of the society. But the founding of the society, the magazine, it does have some political elements, and it can tell us a good amount about the age of science and expanding American empire and more in the late 1800s. So here to discuss National Geographic, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Were your household subscribers?
I believe we were.
Yeah,
actually.
I think so, too. My grandparents were. Maybe not my parents, but definitely my grandparents.
Yeah. But do you have memories of the, piling up of the
Yes.
yellow
the pile of magazines with that yellow border, which is how it lives in my visual memory.
Yeah. I still have some, actually. I keep, my grandparents, when they passed away, I kept a lot of their, ebony magazines and jet magazines, and I have a couple National Geographic ones, too. Yeah. I probably need to put them, in preservation paper or something, because they're pretty old, but...
Well, in 1984, when National Geographic opens a new building, Ronald Reagan attends the ceremony and has a pretty good joke. He says, I guess you guys had trouble storing your old National Geographics as well. So there you go.
If the New Yorker ever opens a museum, we've got our punchline.
We could do a whole thing on this, but I had to, a number of years ago, just adopt a very, a 5-week, it's gone policy with the New Yorkers, because otherwise they would just stack to the ceiling. But obviously, it was a society before it was a magazine. What was the impetus behind starting the society? And then I think, as I said, kind of what does it reflect about the 1880s?
The 1880s really were this period in which, there had been such an emphasis in the United States on westward expansion across the continent. And that felt kind of done by the 1880s, or close to done, right? Frederick Jackson Turner is going to talk about the closing of the frontier just a few years later. And white people in the U.S. turn their eyes elsewhere, and they start thinking more...
itchy feet.
Yeah. They're like, well, we need new lands to conquer, and start casting their gaze to other parts of the planet. And that coincides with a kind of scientific mission. As science is becoming more professionalized, the idea is you go to these places, maybe you study the origins of evolution, or maybe you study these new cultures as anthropology is emerging as a discipline. And so National Geographic becomes about charting and studying and supporting the exploration of all of these different places across the world.
And it's not just the exploration of things that you would think of like the North Pole or the South Pole or these extreme weather environments. But this is also happening at the same time as the Scramble for Africa and the Berlin Conference, and where people are taking colonialism to a whole nother level, especially on the continent. And National Geographic, I really think, shapes a lot of the ideas that the public has about what these spaces look like and what they entail, and how we should sort of understand them, for better or for worse, and often for worse.
Yeah. And we'll get into that for sure. But, there's also obviously a technological element here. I mean, mass communication. The world is kind of getting smaller. Or, and while at the same time there are parts of sort of quote unquote uncharted parts of the world to explore. Who was part of this group? So there's 33 men originally. Of course, it's men. They found this actual society. It's geographers, explorers, teachers, lawyers, cartographers, some military folks, some financiers.
Yes, the little cakes.
The little cakes, yeah. I've never actually used that word in a non-little cake context.
Some finance bros.
Some finance bros of the time. The first president, I love this. The first president is a guy named Gardner Green Hubbard, who is a lawyer and philanthropist. He was also Alexander Graham Bell's father-in-law. Alexander Graham Bell was one of the first members, one of the founding members of the society. But this lawyer philanthropist with three names, Gardner Green Hubbard, was apparently selected because he was the closest to like a layman, a regular guy, a man of the people of all this group. So it shows you kind of how elite this group is. Where they're like, oh yeah, we should give it to like, the salt of the earth guy over there. How about that lawyer philanthropist? So he becomes the first president. Definitely a like very high end, very connected group. And I think that sets the cast for what we're discussing here. About how this organization tends to really represent a kind of elite view of expansion and sort of America's place in that.
Before we get to that story, I mean, I think that Hubbard, as the layperson in charge of this organization, is important because it is kind of like a step forward in the field of science communication. So they're going to be using this magazine, which is founded shortly after, they're taking advantage of all of these new technologies. You have cheap newsprint for the first time. You have photography, which is really coming of age. And this is what National Geographic is going to become known for. And at first, the magazine is pretty technical, but then it gets focused on like a more general audience. And I think if you see that in the choice of Hubbard, that you don't want necessarily like a scientist doing all of the communicating about the world that they're exploring. You want like a layperson who can make it understandable to people who aren't scientists. And that's kind of the work. There's a lot of other work that National Geographic is doing, but that's the work that it's doing.
It becomes much more visual. I mean, like, I think most people, when they're looking at magazines, if you're not reading it for the stories, you're looking at it for the pictures and for the photography and so what the imagery sort of says in that moment. And that's what really becomes the game changer for National Geographic. I mean, like, once Grosvenor takes over, like, their circulation explodes. I mean, they go from like 1,000 subscribers to like 2 million subscribers of this magazine because people have these appetites and this interest.
They know what the dads of America want. They want pictures of elephants, maybe a couple cool ships in there. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, what is, as a society and as a magazine, what is the story that it is telling about the world and about America's place in the world?
I mean, so I was just telling y'all earlier that I teach part of this in my class on Introduction to the Black Experience, and we talk about like the perceptions that people have of Africa and the continent as a whole. And part of the ideas that are being shaped or the narratives that are being shaped come through this National Geographic lens of Africans as primitive, as barbaric, as without civilization, and that it's a lot of white man's burden in terms of like how people go about bringing them either Christianity or technology or language or however you sort of want to splice it. But that's kind of what National Geographic becomes, like this propagandist ambassador that goes out not just showing you the world, but telling you how you should think of the world as well.
Have you ever had the urge to sneak behind the cordoned-off areas of a museum? Or roam the halls after closing time? The Smithsonian's flagship podcast, Side Door, will sneak you behind the scenes of the world's largest museum and research complex. Come learn about the ghosts that supposedly walk the museum halls after dark, how a train robbery gave rise to criminal forensics, why leeches are actually the coolest thing ever, and how to get away with murder in the Arctic. Maybe. You'll discover stories of history, science, art, and culture you won't find in a display case. You can listen to Side Door wherever you get your podcasts, or find us online at si.edu/sidedoor.
So, we're a few weeks into the new year. Do you feel like a new you? One opportunity we get to reimagine ourselves can come through a new wardrobe. Seriously, refreshing your clothes can go a long way. And this year, I've resolved to keep my look fresh while also trying to stay on a budget. Luckily, there's Quince. Let's go through a few early year wardrobe items. It might be cold wherever you're listening to this right now. Well, how about a Mongolian cashmere sweater? $50. Maybe you've resolved to hit the gym more? Okay, well, there's plenty of activewear options from sports bras to leggings. New year, new business. You want to look sharp in suits and blazers. They're on there as well. For me, we're going to be doing a lot more video episodes of this podcast this year, and I'm not going to go out there looking like a schlub. So keep an eye out when you watch those for some classy sweaters and button-downs. I can get it together when I need to, folks, and Quince is going to help. Upgrade your closet this year without the upgraded price tag. Go to quince.com/thisday for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/thisday to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday.
And it's so rooted in that mission of imperialism. You know, Kellie talked about the white man's burden, right? This idea that these are some combination of backward, empty, uncivilized spaces. And so on the one hand, you know, when the lens is trained on nature, it's about saying, oh, look at this beautiful, empty, exotic land that will become a playground for wealthy Americans. People like Teddy Roosevelt will go over to Africa, right, on safaris and things like that. But also, these places are populated by non-civilized people, and we will either go there to civilize them, or civilized people should take control.
Yeah.
Right? They're not maximizing the use of these resources, and so we should go there and maximize the use of those resources. And that's our mission, right? To spread our civilization across the world. And National Geographic is pounding that drum, but in kind of like sophisticated propagandistic ways. I mean, in some ways, it's just like the Negro in Africa is uncivilized. Like, it just states it pretty baldly. But the pictures do a ton of work, too.
Oh, the pictures. I mean, that's what I think National Geographic is so known for. I mean, we've seen these, you know, iconic images of a starving African child or of a African tribe that has sort of deformed its figures with jewelry and or certain natural products and things of that nature that make it seem more exotic and more like, look at this jewelry that they're using, or look at how they're stretching their necks or their mouths, or it feels very like otherworldly in some cases, like you're looking at a world that you never knew existed. And some of that is, I suppose, fine when you're talking about, you know, a glacier or a whale or, you know, some sort of like natural environmental element. But when it comes to people and you start showing, you know, the Amazonians and like in these really primitive ways, it reinforces those ideas of like the jungle and people actually not as human beings.
Right. Obviously, like, there's something political here in the work that National Geographic is doing. And I mean, I think just in terms of the kind of elite circles of who's running the organization as it moves into the 20th century and who's in Washington making decisions, they run in the same circles. I don't think, you know, we've used the word propaganda a couple times. I think this is a good example of how, like, I don't think National Geographic, there's any evidence that it was like a proper sort of seeded propaganda arm, but the perspective was in lockstep with an American imperial mid-century perspective. I mean, think about, like, you hear these stories about, like, people in the State Department who, like, led the Africa desk and they'd never been to Africa, right? But they've subscribed to National Geographic and they've looked at a lot of pictures and, you know, whatever. But it's like, it's a little bit of those vibes, though at the same time, I think National Geographic did go there, and, you know, to get the pictures, you actually have to go there. But that's the kind of elite white male perspective, I think, that just sort of embodies National Geographic for many years, and is certainly at the heart of a lot of kind of the American project for many years.
And it wasn't just writers and photographers for National Geographic who were going there. They used the money that they raise as an organization and through the sale of these magazines to fund expeditions. So that scientific exploration and imperial projects sort of walk hand in hand. And so they're funding people to go to the North Pole, to go to the South Pole. Jacques Cousteau is going down under the sea thanks to some National Geographic grants. Jane Goodall is working with wild chimpanzees and partially funded by National Geographic. So the scientific mission and the imperial mission are just inseparable. And so it's...
But a lot of that science is incredibly important, and that environmentalism is incredibly important. Yeah, I mean, I'm struck by... I did an event last fall with a climate activist, but who got his start as a photographer, and sort of in talking with him and just thinking now, like, you realize how much kind of this important scientific work. I mean, he does like deep glacial research, but he funds it by the fact that he goes and he takes pictures of it when he's there, and then he sells that to the National Geographics of the world or the sort of TV channels or whatever. But it's like so much of this important research is funded on the back of like photographs and photography. So you see how those projects work together.
Well, you kind of can't have a magazine without photographs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not an interesting one, not one that you want to peruse through,
right. And you can't sort of convey these stories. I mean, I don't think people kind of really can understand what it means to see a glacier, for that a glacier is melting. But then when you see photos of something, you know, over the course of 20, 50 years, or, you know, the polar bear stranded alone on the glacier, which I know is a complicated thing because, you know...
charismatic megafauna.
Yeah, the charismatic megafauna thing. But, you know, again, like this stuff does penetrate the culture for good and sometimes for bad as well. National Geographic apologized fairly recently for some of this kind of like colonialist stance. And so, you know,
they got their first woman president, and that's when they were like, we should issue an apology. We should turn the mirror on ourselves. This is also, I think, during like the height of maybe the summer of 2020, where people were doing a lot more reflection, and National Geographic was like, we have to reflect on our own past and work to do better, really. And yeah, people took that for what it was, but at least they did it.
What else? There's a TV channel. It was launched in 2001.
Oh, yeah.
They actually run expeditions. So if people, I mean, part of the ways that they help continue to fund the organization is people will go to like the Galapagos Islands or on safari or to Antarctica to allow them to have that same experience as explorers once did.
I have to say, there is nothing more soothing than like watching some expedition, usually the underwater ones, where they're showing you like animals you've never seen before. And I think the latest one I watched, like Barack Obama's narrating it, and you're like, look at these fish. And look at, like, and it's like it would lull me to sleep, but it's also so beautiful and like extraordinary to see nature in this way that I'm not mad at it.
And that will never go away, right? Every 6 months, I'm down for
I know, right?
Edinburgh or whatever. Yeah,
I'm like, kids, gather around.
and there's National Geographic Kids. My daughter subscribes to National Geographic Kids, so every like once in a while, she'll just like walk into the room and be like, "Did you know that the sloth?" I'm like,
it's always sloth.
It's always sloth. A lot of sloth facts. All right. Final thing before we go, we're talking about the founding of the society, and then we said 9 months later, in the fall of 1888, is the first magazine. Very technical, brown cover. How much does a pretty good condition National Geographic 1888 first issue sell for on eBay? There's one listed right now.
Oh,
$1,500.
$1,500?
I don't know.
I'm gonna say like $5,000.
Way
high.
Way
25
high.
cents.
Okay, wait.
No. Way higher.
Oh, way higher.
Oh, way higher. Oh,
guys,
like
$300,000.
Shut up.
Okay. Well, is that like the buy now
Magazine
price?
from 1888.
$300,000. That's insane.
It's just a magazine.
I don't
There's
know.
no way. It's just a magazine.
That seems reasonable to me. And then there
That
are a
seems
lot of
reasonable
people.
to you?
I mean, it seems like, you know,
Are you gonna
Money
buy
bags
Jody?
over here.
reasonable is not the right word, but, you know, it seems like, okay, it is what it is.
Sports betting's
You know,
going well.
there's others for like a few $1,000, and then there are a bunch of people selling like their collections, you know. So for about $4,000, you can buy 35 years, mid-40s to the 80s collection of pretty good condition.
But what are you
so,
going to
you know,
do? I mean, it's like a Beanie Baby. You know, like, what are you going to do with this? Like,
why
what
does
are you
anyone
gonna
collect
store?
anything? I mean, people buy,
True.
Harlan Crow is going to buy this stuff. You know that.
Might be from the wrong country, but sure.
Yeah, that's true.
I
Some
just
of the
worry
early
about
stuff.
preservation. Like I don't have enough space on my bookshelves
Totally.
right now because
Yeah,
my
but
books
that's
are
the thing.
getting out of control.
One man's leftover magazines is another man's treasure. So
Yeah.
there you go. All right. But anyway, if anyone has $300,000, please give it to us. Don't buy the first issue of National Geographic magazine. Nicole Hammer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.